Lovely to have you here. It is sunny. I'm going to make a confession. I told Mandy, I said, I've been running really late this morning and I only just got here. What I didn't tell her is the reason of running late is because I just went surfing. I have a long day. I actually have to work, teach some classes this evening. And so I thought, I'm going to duck out while the sun is bright. And so anyway, I've had a good start to the day. Hope your day's going well too. I want to talk about food. Obviously, we're all interested in food. Most of us are addicted to food because we have to eat several times a day. well, at least we can't get by without it. But there's some really interesting work that's been done around this whole idea of when to eat. And so that's what I've titled this one, When is a Good Time to Eat? I didn't know this, but when Mandy and I, when we were chatting before we came on, both of us have actually been doing a bit of a self-experiment in this space. So that was a bit ironic. So anyway, let's have some fun with this. First of all, I found this slide the other day. This is like, I love dad jokes, right? Because I'm obviously a dad. So here's one I'm going to use, right? Have you ever tried to eat a clock? It's very time consuming, especially when you go back for seconds. How good is that? I mean, there's two jokes rolled into the one there. What I love about this image, because I've seen this in my own family with some of my favorite dad jokes, is there's the dad think this is the funniest thing he's ever heard in his life or said in his life. And there is looks like his teenagers just rolling their eyes and burying their head going. So anyway, if that happens to you, don't feel alone. Where they're right there with you. Okay, in terms of nutrition, I'm really obviously interested in nutrition, but I actually have some problems with nutrition too. And one of them is there's just so many conflicting, stories that get out there, and it's just there's like these diet wars that go on. People are so adamant. This is the way you got to eat, and this is the way, and you're bad for thinking that way. And there's a real ideology often associated with different eating patterns. What I will say, if you take a consensus, I think that what we need to do is come together. And yeah, there are different variants and people have different ideas, but I think what we all must agree on is that, and I think that there's, to my mind, and I'd go out, on a limb of saying this, if any diet that's saying that you shouldn't be eating fresh, whole fruits and vegetables has a problem. There is overwhelming evidence that this is what we are meant to eat, and this is actually they're rich in nutrients. They've just got so many good things in there for us. So I don't think, even if you look at the national, nutrition guidelines in the United States and other countries, they always lead with eat. They generally recommend 5 serves of vegetables and 2 serves of fruit a day. So I'm just going to roll with it and say this is what we should be, leading with. If you look at in the United States, they have the My Plate diet, how you should carve your plate out, and at least half of it should be, composed of these sorts of high nutrient foods. So the what is pretty simple. I think there is consensus there. The when to eat. This is an area that's attracting a whole lot more research attention, and I think that it's really quite a fascinating space. And as I said, been doing a bit of a self-experiment with this myself. So I wonder if you can finish this quote. I'm sure you've heard it before, and is anyone, if you can put it in the chat function. So it starts by saying, "Eat breakfast like a king," and then the story goes on. Is anyone? If you type in there, I'll give you just like 20 seconds to see how you go. I'm sure you've heard the sentiment of this. How we go, Mandy? We got any insights there? No one's typed it yet. This is, I'm sure you've probably come across this, but this is how it often finishes. Something like this: eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. Right? And so really what the sentiment of what this is saying is stack your eating towards the beginning of the day. Right. So yeah, eat a good, great breakfast, get a little bit lighter on for lunch, and by dinner time, really tame it and have sort of minimal amounts. And that's a really interesting insight. And there is actually good evidence to suggest that there's a good rationale for this. I want to give this gentleman here a plug. I know that many of you be familiar with him already. He runs the organisation, or he's the face for the organisation called Nutrition Facts. This is Dr. Michael Greger. He's a legend. I love this dude, and I've seen him. I've met him several times and seen him present. He's a very gifted presenter, but very sharp mind, and he's got a whole at nutritionfacts.org. There's a whole raft of different topics that you can look up relating to nutrition. I think he's very evidence based and trust what he says. So, but what he actually in one of his little videos that he has here, you can see it's called "Eating More Calories in the Morning to Lose Weight." And a lot of the studies that have been done have really focused on, in terms of meal timing, how it impacts body weight. And the early research was actually done with rats. And so in rat models, what we know is that rats are nocturnal creatures, right? So their whole physiology, right, what we call their chronobiology, chrono is in time, their chronobiology is geared towards them being active at nighttime and then resting and sleeping during the day. And what they find, if you modify when these rats can eat, such that, and you give them the same amount of calories, total calories over the course of the day, but you give some of them, so they can eat while they're active during the day, and then others they're forced to eat when they're in their downtime, when they're not typically active during the day. What you see is that those calories are more fattening if they are fed at times when they're not normally eating. And so this actually gave rise to, well, what if that's the case for rats? What about humans? And certainly there seems to be evidence that the same is for us humans. And obviously we're opposite. We're generally not nocturnal. We are out and about during the day, and then we are meant to be resting at night. And so when you actually feed humans the same amount of calories during the day as compared to at night, the nighttime calories seem to be more fattening. What this has given rise to is this whole idea of time restricted feeding, and the idea that we shouldn't be grazing all day long. And what if we can actually that because there is, and I don't have time to spend looking at the literature on all this, but there is good evidence that fasting, having periods of time when you're not eating, is actually really beneficial as well. And so there's actually a movement now. They used to call it intermittent fasting. Now it's often just referred to as time restricted feeding or time restricted eating. And what they recommend is that people, for example, keep all of their eating in, say, a 10-hour window. So that might mean starting at 8 a.m. and then finishing by 6 p.m. So you actually have then a 14-hour period of fasting. So it's like a daily fast. That some will become even more aggressive with that. It might be a 6-hour feeding window, or even a 4-hour feeding window if you're able to do that. And certainly there is really good documented evidence, and I think it's a great practice to be able to do this time restricted eating. And what the general recommendation is, in lieu of what we've already heard, is stack your eating towards the beginning of the day, right? And not in later in the day. And there's certainly a real convention for that. And there's evidence that's a very helpful thing to do. But I love this paper here. Because what this paper, you can see the title of it, Time Restricted Eating, the benefits, and there are many, the mechanisms by which it has those benefits, and we're getting a better understanding about what physiologically happens during that fasting period, and there are benefits. But then it says, and the challenges to this. And so here is, I think, a really interesting thing. What they identify is that, in theory, in theory, it works really great, right? And if you put people in a study and you're quite regimented and they're forced to do this, yeah, you get some really good outcomes. But do you know what? In real life, in practice, it can be actually quite hard to do for some people. And I'm one of them, right? Because I thought, okay, this is a great thing. Yep. And I've always been a, good breakfast eater, and then my lunch. And then what I tried to do is go, okay, well, just not eat after a certain time and really dial back my consumption later in the day. And I'm ravenous. And like literally, I can't go to sleep properly until I get up and have something to eat so I can sleep. And then I've just blown the whole thing apart. And what this study points out is that, if people aren't able to actually follow through and do it, the best laid plans don't really, aren't that helpful at all. And what actually makes this a little bit tougher is that we actually know that for most people, their hunger hormones like ghrelin actually peak later in the day. So you actually are hungrier then for many people. And so there's this interesting little tension. Okay, yeah, there seems to be evidence this it works if you actually can stack your calories early in the day, but it's challenging for some people to follow through on. Here's the intriguing bit. There's a lot of the studies that have been done showing that stacking your calories early in the day is the most beneficial time, and it likely is. But a lot of them have actually been done on, for example, like in the military, which are very regimented, and they're up early and their day is set and they have a very structured circadian cycle, like a biorhythm, like a chronobiology. And they're quite A people, personalities, and they're all, they all fall in line. What about though, if it wasn't the case for everyone? And this is the last study I'll share. But this hasn't been published yet, but it was presented at the Nutrition 2025 conference. And what they found here is that if you actually did an assessment on people first, right? Didn't just assume that everyone's the same because we aren't all the same, but instead actually dug down and they did like a chronotype assessment. So there's actually a little assessment you can do, asks you, what time do you like to get up? What do you have to wake up to an alarm? What time do you naturally go to bed? When do you do this? When do you feel best to do activity? And a whole range of questions. And you can get an assessment as to whether you're a lark, up really early, or whether you're an owl who, is phase shift more towards later in the day. Then once they had made that assessment, when they actually gave people calories and stacked their calories accordingly, such that for the early birds, they had about 80% of their calories consumed earlier, which included lunch. So when I say early, it's not first thing on rising, but in the first sort of half of the day. And then for the owls, the night owls, they actually stacked it more towards the second half of the day, including lunch. So it's, late morning, but most of their calories were there. It was that actually produced the best outcomes. And so I'm intrigued by this because I mentioned that I'm doing a self-experiment. Excuse me, and Mandy had indicated she's doing the same. I like this idea of time restricted feeding, but I find it really hard in practice to do early in the morning till, not eating much late at night. What I do find quite simple is to actually eat quite late in the morning. It's almost like sort of late, early lunch is my first meal, and then to have a dinner, and that I don't have any trouble with that. In fact, I would even say, and I'm not. I actually wish I were, but I'm not a lark. I'm actually not a really early riser. I get that from my mum. She's terrible. She's a serious owl up that end of the spectrum. But I find for me, this seems to work quite well. So phase shifting keeping that time restricted feeding, but phase shifting a little bit more sort of in the middle. It's actually interesting when I do the chronotype assessment, I actually come out not as a lark and not as an owl, but something in the middle, which we like to call eagle because, and it's not a technical term, it's just eagles sound cool. So anyway, we would love your reflections on this. The science is emerging. So I'm not, adamant about any of this. I'm not locking in saying this is the way it needs to be. But we'd love, you get to have the opportunity to chat a little bit about it.